I went to an auction one day to buy a farm tractor. And I did end up buying the farm tractor, but there was a very strange machine sitting out there. And there was a junk dealer there loading the corn shredder onto his junk truck. He was gonna junk it. And for some reason, I talked him into selling it to me. And after I got home, I started doing research and that on it, and I found out it was made by a company called Appleton Manufacturing. And about that time, I caught the collector disease. I learned to recognize stuff that was made by them, which is really the hardest part of finding it, because after 100 years, most of the names and so forth are rusted over or the wood is rotten. And I believe I found an Appleton corn sheller, a small one. And I said after that, it just kind of got out of hand. After I was in it a while, I started displaying some of my stuff at the local steam shows. I handed out my ID card and so forth. Local people would start calling me or telling me about what they had at home in their shed or laying out in the orchard or on a fence line. A lot of times it ended up to be Appleton. The company usually put out a catalog every year back then, and there are very detailed pictures of them of the equipment in there. A lot of times I could pick up the painting schemes and so forth off of it. Sometimes I'll go to an auction or a museum and I'll see a piece and I will take a picture of it, and then I will copy it at home. I like to think I get it back within 90% of what it looked like originally. For the first few years that Appleton Manufacturing was in business, they did make hay trolleys. After they were in business a little while, this type kind of went obsolete, so you do not see too many of these around. They called it the Badger trolley. Every barn that was built would have a track up in the peak of the barn, and the trolley would be used to move the hay into the barn from the wagon. If you watch the old westerns, the manual process was with a fork, and when they went to the trolley system, they would usually use the horses to raise the hay up and then pull it into the barn. But then after it got into the barn, then it was back to the manual fork again. So that's a very rare piece. Like I said, it wasn't a good idea, so they only made them for a short period of time, if they made it at all. Well, the most common piece that was made by Appleton was their #1 burr mill. They made 27 different models of burr mills for grinding grain. They say in their catalog they built 1,000 of them the first year. And I believe by 1892 they were building about 2,000 of them a year. There'd be 2 of these in here for grinding grain. And what was amazing about this, you could power it off of a very low source. Almost anything you had. I have one that's powered off of a windmill or a horsepower or a treadmill, whatever you had. And I believe they might have made as many as 30,000 of these. You could make cow feed, pig feed, or flour and make a cake. What makes the patent different, they have blades in the middle to basically cut the corn, but around the outside it was very fine, and it was used to grind it to a very fine powder. Like I said, you could make a cake and anything off of it. Okay, this is the #1 Appleton burr mill, what they made the most of. But this one is unique because it was ordered to run off of a power windmill. Okay, I said it goes to a power windmill. Power windmill has a shaft coming down the middle that would be turning, and it would be hooked up with a flat belt to the windmill. Another product that they made a lot of was the single hole corn shellers. Every farmer needed one of those and could afford one. When you went into their sales room or what, they would probably ask the farmer or the hardware store what they had to power it. And back in the beginning, did they have a water wheel? Did they have a windmill? Did they have a horsepower, a steam engine, a hit and miss engine? And then the equipment you bought from them would be geared or matched up to what you had at home. Catalogs that I have from the 1886 and so forth, one of their big products was selling the treadmill for horses to create their power. And much of their equipment was designed to run off of a horsepower. Well, back in the day, in the 1800s again, power was hard to come by, and one of the products that Appleton sold was the horsepower, where the horses would walk in a circle creating power. They made various sizes of these. This is a 1 or a 2 horse. You could use this to power a lot of your small equipment. It had a lot of different uses. Horses would walk in a circle, generating power on a power takeoff. Well, this is a firewood saw for sawing firewood to keep your house warm in the wintertime. It was quite common. They had many of these in northern Wisconsin at one time. You could power this off of the horsepower, walking in a circle. That's the way it was originally bought. You could put a 20-foot log in the carriage here. You could move the carriage back and forth using this lever. Using this lever, you could raise and lower the blade, and all the operator had to do was stand there. Well, after Appleton Manufacturing moved to Batavia, Illinois, they got into a little bigger farm products. And in 1905, they come out with their first manure spreader. This particular one here was made in about 1911. It was really their second model at it. This one has all wood frame. 4 of them had a conventional floor in them with the chain. They also made them higher, narrower, wider, whatever would fit in your barn. And I say this was a 1911 model. Well, when Appleton moved out of Appleton, Wisconsin, they joined forces with the company Goodhue in Batavia, Illinois. And Goodhue was into making bigger corn equipment. I know they were trying to develop corn pickers back at the time. However, this corn picker is rather unusual. It was made by the Appleton company down there. I'm sure it followed up on a lot of the patents that Goodhue had arrived. You could buy this corn picker 3 different ways. It could be ground drive, it could be a mounted engine, or a power takeoff drive. When I found this down at an auction down by Milwaukee, it was not identifiable. It had been sitting outside a long time. And by some miracle, I was able to recognize it as an Appleton picker. When I got it home, I discovered it might have been the only known one to exist. And it has a serial number stamped into the white oak up there of 1269. Now, I have no idea how honest that number is, but I know I can't find another one, so I have nothing to compare it to. And this one was made in about 1927. The interesting thing about it is it has almost identical features of what the modern New Idea and Oliver pickers have on it. But back in 1927, they didn't know really what a grease gun. The grease guns were just coming out. It didn't have very many bearings on it, so they were apt to wear out fairly quick. Well, in their 1918 catalog, they advertise they are selling tractors. I have a sheet that gives all the specifics of the transmission, the engine, and so forth. I know they built a prototype. I've seen pictures of them picking corn and so forth with it, but I don't know of anybody that ever bought one or if they ever made one and put it into production. I know I've checked with some pretty big collectors and so forth and people that are involved with that kind of stuff, and so far I haven't had any luck. When you're a collector, you drag all kinds of things home and you look for the very unusual. My daughter stopped in at an antique store one day, asked if they had anything made by Appleton Manufacturing. And she gave me this as a Christmas present. It's a dinner bell. And for some reason it got Appleton Manufacturing cast into it. I know they didn't sell bells. Was this made up as the factory dinner bell, or was it made maybe for one of their executives? I have no idea how it come about.